So first of all, I'd like to thank LSI, Henry Peck, Scott Pentel, and the entire LSI team for organizing this panel today with this fantastic group of investors and entrepreneurs. So my name is Armen Vidian, co-founder and co-managing partner of Recode Ventures. We invest at the intersection of artificial intelligence with healthcare and the life sciences. We invest there because we believe that AI is going to be fundamentally disruptive to CapEx and OpEx. We invest at the seed and the Series A. I'll first get started by allowing each of my fellow co-panelists to do similar introduction before we get started with questions.
Absolutely. Thank you. Hi, my name is Jyoti. I run cardiovascular and interventional solutions for GE Healthcare. I've spent about 20 years in GE Healthcare, background in ultrasound, anesthesia, and now cardiology.
Hi, thank you for having me on the panel. My name's Adrian Lam. I'm the president and CEO of CorVista Health. I'm a recovering biomedical engineer, and I in the second half of my career was in healthcare specialist investing. I was at a firm that actually led Dan's Series C at Shockwave almost 9 years ago.
Yeah, that was a minute ago.
Just a minute ago, yeah. So very honored to be here among giants.
My name is Daniel Hawkins. I am CEO of Vista.ai, focused in using neural networks to enable automated scanning for MRI machines. Initial focus in cardiac. As mentioned, been in this business a little bit of time, 30 plus years. Not in imaging, but 30 plus years in medtech, and one of the companies in the past that I was involved with was Shockwave Medical.
Excellent. So I'll get started with perhaps a bigger question. Realizing that first, the core of a good product is solving a problem that's a big pain point for a customer, a patient or a physician, and it really starts there. And AI is a technology which is very interesting and has impacted a lot of corners of healthcare. But still, it kind of begs the question of why is AI so interesting in cardiovascular medicine? And why do we believe that it has flourished so much in cardiovascular medicine, it seems first, rather than other parts of medicine? Do you have any thoughts about that from the perspective of both GE and as entrepreneurs, why that might be?
Yeah, absolutely. I can go first on that one. And you started with the unmet need, and the prior panel talked a lot about that too, right? In cardiovascular, the unmet need is very clear. The number of deaths that happen, many preventable deaths that happen. So I think the pull has been there. And cardiology, to an extent, when you just think about the evolution of AI in the early days, relying a lot on data, I mean, this is rich with data, right? Structured, multimodal data sets. Many of them lend themselves also to pattern recognition, to automation. That's sort of where it started, right? And then you were addressing these key pain points of sonographer shortages, sonographer burnouts, because 90% of sonographers in the US actually have issues with MSK, repetitive actions, right? So just really hitting upon a very clear unmet need. And I truly believe that with AI in cardiovascular, it's not just about workflow or clinical decision support. It will, I think, elevate itself across the care continuum, from screening to diagnostics to interventional, all the way through follow-up. So the ability of a technology like AI to actually change outcomes is immense in this area. So you see a lot of that pull as well.
I know that we often look at companies first that have really unique, interesting data sets. That's kind of the prerequisite. The AI itself is frankly doing the math on top of it almost.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Do you believe that those that come to you from the cardiovascular arena have better data sets, higher quality, more interesting? Is that differentiated versus other areas, or they're similar in that regard?
I mean, there are multiple large data sets, but I think for us, what's interesting is when it becomes multimodal, that becomes really interesting, because that's now able to solve problems beyond the point algorithms that you can do. And that's where the care continuum comes into play.
Excellent. Adrian, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I take a slightly different angle to Jyoti here, not disagreeing, but rather than looking at the solution set and what we can sort of learn from with what we have in terms of data assets, I look at the problem. It is a multifactorial problem, right? And a multifactorial problem requires a multifactorial solution. it isn't really just about tech and specs. As engineers and scientists and physicians, we care a lot about, say, maybe eking out that 5% extra gain in sensitivity and specificity, a few decimal places on AUC. But really, if you look at the problems, it is about physical access, it is about compliance and adherence, it is about behavioral inertia, right? And I think that's why cardiovascular medicine is so interesting, because the problem is not just to do with that tech and specs. It is a lot to do with that behavior change. And so different AIs, we talk about AI as one big kind of umbrella, but there are so many different types of AIs, right? And so leveraging the different forms of AI for different use cases and different problems gives the cardiovascular space a really rich opportunity set.
Daniel?
So I look at it as a bit of a mix in some respects, but cardiovascular is very, very complicated. And as a result, the human mind with lots of expertise can manage the decision process from the onslaught of data. AI has an opportunity, if trained properly, to optimize the management of that data, right? So I'm on the MR side of the business in imaging, as I mentioned. If you think about what an MR needs to do, you've got to be an expert in assessing not only the position of the heart, the size of the heart. You've got to manage breathing. You've got to manage EKGs. You've got to manage different angles that tissue might present in a particular patient, and the disease state requirements to do all of that. That's multifactorial by itself. So one can understand that level of problem. Computer vision, watching that, is going to do better than humans, candidly. Now let's pop up a level and look at the broad base of cardiovascular. An EKG signal, just give me a strip. Somebody with lots of experience is probably going to pick up 99.5% of what's there, but there's a half point they're going to miss. Well-trained AI is not going to miss it. Right. So that there's a level of complexity and processing that the human mind needs to do, that varying experience is going to give you different results. Properly trained AI with the right data sets, doing the right math, is going to do better than a human. Right. So there's an opportunity in cardiovascular, because of the intensity of data, for computers to do better. And that's why I think, to a certain extent, cardiovascular is leading the way.
And where are the physicians with this when we see about how their questions have evolved over the past several years as AI has come along? From your perspectives, both from large companies and from new ones, how have you seen questions change? For example, from my perspective, I know when Caption Health, which AI-guided cardiac ultrasound, which anyone can do, in the first pass with the company, with customers, the big question was, will it work? Right? Fundamentally, is this going to even be able to generate a diagnostic quality image? What questions have you seen, and how have they changed, become more sophisticated or not over the years, and what persists?
For the very foundation of AI, everybody started asking, so is this ChatGPT? No, it's not.
Right.
Totally different from that. Then people started to get a little more sophisticated. Are these CNNs? Are they LLMs? And when they get more sophisticated and you're working on an LLM, then they're starting asking questions about the data set, the biases that are in the data set, disease state, geography, gender. There's a wide range of factors that can impact the ultimate result. We're upstream to that in some respects at Vista, because we're not doing diagnosis, right? But the categories that are focused on diagnosis, to your earlier point, Armen, data sets matter a lot. And the refreshing nature of that data set is terribly important. Now you're getting into a whole new place. How do you refresh? Is that part of your commercial agreement? Now you're into a place where the hospital ethics committee starts to get involved. A year ago, the notion of an AI focus group or AI committee in a hospital didn't really exist. Now I'm seeing an 8 out of 10 commercial conversations I'm having. So there's absolutely an evolution, and maybe not at the speed of AI, but there's an evolution.
Mm.
Yeah, something that we've seen in our initial couple of months launching our product. So CorVista Health is very much about accessible AI in the doctor's office. And the majority of the sites that we go to and we train we're training them on AI for the first time. And so at first there's a excitement, this is cool tech, new tech. How does it work? But then it very quickly goes to the other side of things, the trepidation, what is the type 2 error? How does it get things wrong? The explainability side of things. It really, really jumps into that area very, very quickly. And so I think, right now we see a lot of generative AI tools, as Dan mentioned, like the CNNs and all that. But you really got to differentiate, are those tools right for the front line of care? In the diagnostics where you can't afford these false negatives or false positives, type 2 errors, maybe that setting is actually more appropriate for machine learning, more pure and traditional forms of machine learning where it's really just fancy maths and fancy stats, right? Versus generative AI approaches, maybe more useful for the back end. It'll probably get there eventually, right? In terms of the hallucinations and, all these things that we fear, but maybe not quite yet. And so it's about, again, the same thing, using the right type of AI for the right use case, I think is really, really key. And it's not even about the FDA sometimes. It's about giving comfort to the nurses, to the doctors who are adopting your technology.
Yeah, we actually, it's come a long way, to be honest. In the very early days, you would have to explain, what you're trying to do with that. Okay, you could cut 5 steps out. You could auto-measure things. You can automatically understand if there is potential LV dysfunction. You can get injection fraction out of an ultrasound, for example. So it was all interesting, but there were lots of questions. I think in the recent past, we are past that phase, right? They're not necessarily questioning why AI. It's very clear. In fact, we get a lot of ideas back from, you look at the clinician stakeholder, or what else we can automate, right? Why can't you have these workflows stitched together? As an example, if you go to a cath lab, you have so many pre-procedural data sets. Can you bring that together with what I'm doing intraoperatively? Why can't AI do this? So we get a lot of use cases that we wouldn't have necessarily thought about, and how we solve it is up to us, right? That's different AI for different use cases, but there is a lot of openness. They at the end of the day, we have to tell them how you pass the ethical considerations, how do you train, where is the bias, explainable AI. There are AI committees in big health systems that you have to get past, right? Which is all good, but we get asked for things like Caption Health. Caption Health is like a scan guidance AI solution that is on our handheld ultrasound. That's to an extent democratizing having ultrasound in the very early stages of triaging patients. For example, let's take aortic stenosis, right? In the communities, how can you triage? So we get asked, why can't you do more with that? If I want to go to an ASC, an OBL setup, I want to take it out of the walls of the hospital, what more can you do in that area? How can you scale that solution? So there are very, very good conversations. I think we are past the point of, how you can help us. Now it's a bit more, how do you build momentum on top of that?
Does the AI also depend on form factor? So different for handheld versus your large in OR machines and so forth. Does it change the different types of requirements depending on that form factor? Is there more or less significance depending on it?
I think we are building models that are scalable, clearly, right? To an extent, there is a footprint issue, there is a deployment issue, and that's certainly there. But beyond that, I'd say, look, for us, the form factors are, you could be on the scanner, you could be on the edge, you could be on the cloud. It sort of doesn't matter. We are trying to create that connectivity in that ecosystem, right? That it has to be able to transfer along. It shouldn't matter where you're, for example, where you're scanning, where the procedure is being done. To an extent also, who is doing it? At some point, we should be able to transcend that barrier as well, right? Who is the specialist doing it? Do you need a specialist to do something?
Tell me a little bit about how AI has changed in its significance to GE's strategy overall. How you see it in importance for customers, your business strategy, Any comments about how we should think about it from GE's perspective?
I think this changed the landscape for all of us as medtechs, right? Whether you're a GE, a device company, a startup, or what have you. So I think the one thing we are learning is we are truly wanting to build that ecosystem. So we do a lot of partnerships in the area because it's a huge problem. The unmet need is so huge. We obviously want to go at it together with multiple companies. So that's one thing we're doing. We've clearly recognized that, we come traditionally from as a hardware company, and we've evolved very, very quickly. And the differentiation is truly today about solving a given problem. It's not necessarily about always the best image quality, right? As an imaging company, but it's far beyond that. Can you actually, redo procedures in an EP lab? And how can you use software to do that? So that differentiator is hugely important. And I think that has evolved. As a company, I can tell you our early days, again, were many point AI solutions, like most other people in the market, right? And now we are at a stage where we are stitching the workflows together, redefining workflows completely, and literally looking at the care continuum. If we can't stitch things across the care continuum, we won't be able to change the way outcomes are perceived by patients, right? So that's sort of the focus shift that has happened. And of course, how do you sell them? There is an entire business model shift that has happened. Yeah.
And as both of you hear that as entrepreneurs, how do you think of working together with large strategics? Do you at all? How is that important in your strategy? As you've seen the significance of it change to companies like GE, how is that accounting for how you do business with them or your other partners?
Yeah, I mean, because of this multifactorial problem that we said, you're not going to have all the capabilities and muscles with your own organization, and nor will you have the channels and the ears of the different stakeholders in the whole workflow and pathway, right? So it's important to kind of collectively, almost like a team, like team innovators versus the opponent in terms of unmet need. How do you kind of bring your strengths together to access that? And so for us, we are a small company. We're trying to do some damage in a good way. And but we don't have the access that GE has, for instance. We don't have the pedigree that GE has, and maybe some of the engineering thought leaders. And so it's very, very important. I think what we need to do is to really think wider about the form of collaboration. We are a digital health company ourselves, but actually, we acquire our own signals, so we don't actually leverage signals already acquired by other device companies. So maybe some of our partners are actually more of the drug companies, or where they are having difficulty in finding a certain patient pool, for instance, or maybe, because our test is very safe, it doesn't put any radiation or energy into the body. We can be used potentially for, drug response monitoring or drug tracking or titration, whereas you're not going to do a CT more than once a year. So we are, our company is, CorVista is thinking very broadly about the type of collaborator. Even foundational AI models, you see some of the, BioOptimus at Sofinova, we can link with them, link to outcomes for potentially prognostic development, right? So it is absolutely key. And, you're in an industry where you're no longer just simply sticking two bones together or unclogging a tube. You need to impact so many different stakeholders, and you absolutely need partnership in order to deliver that care and innovation.
At Vista, we could not do what we do without partnerships with GE and Siemens. Just going to sort of flatly, we couldn't do it. The reason is because our software actually has read-write control of their MRI machines. That was developed over a 25-year period by one of our three founders. By the way, I'm noted as a founder of Vista. I'm not. I haven't earned that designation. But one of those three founders ran the MRI research lab at Stanford for 25 years. It was funded by GE, Siemens, and 4 NIH grants. It was over that time period that lab created some of what are now the denoising technologies that GE and Siemens use. But one of those two companies asked that founder, could you write CNNs to control the machine because cardiac MR is too hard to do. Technologists can't do it in a repeatable fashion. In fact, only 2% of the MRI machines in the U.S. are regularly used for cardiac. It's the clinical gold standard, but it's literally too hard to do. So there's a default to echo for portions of a patient population that are much better served by CMR. So the cardiologist took the challenge. Dr. Bob Hoot took that challenge. We have partnerships at a development level where we know when a new software package is going to be released by GE and Siemens. We get source code. So we write based on that code to be able to control through their software, their existing installed base and new machines. So we wouldn't be able to exist without it. Now, of course, that's a symbiotic relationship, but it also has its challenges because we're an independent company and each of them have their own efforts, right? So that's an interesting environment. And that's one of the I'm going to say dynamic parts of this that makes it interesting to be running Vista. While at the same time, we're at the crosshairs of the challenges operationally that independent imaging centers and hospitals are dealing with staffing, and the clinical challenges that structural heart is dealing with because they don't have sufficient imaging to be able to do what they need to do. So it's a dynamic environment for us, but truly essential to have those partnerships with industry.
And Jyoti, from your perspective?
I think, look, partnerships are just, it's the way we're going to solve the big problem, right? And I totally get it from a G Healthcare perspective. We are truly trying to say which are the startups, where is innovation coming from, and how does it fit into a platform that we can provide? I mean, our IB is huge, right? So taking this to market together makes a lot of sense. Commercially, it's not always straightforward, right? I mean, the business models are different. CapEx versus OpEx is different. I mean, there is no clear horse in the race that we have because we are like partnering with so many, right? So we are watching and waiting to see where a winner might be as well. So, if you just look at recently, yesterday, in fact, or day before, we announced a partnership with NVIDIA. Right? I mean, that's the type of things we want to do, to sort of bring together and say, how can we use that power as well, go beyond everything that's happening today, physical AI, like how can you do autonomous ultrasound? So we are really aiming big in terms of that, but we recognize fully that we can't do this alone. And that's the ecosystem that I talked about.
Right. I know when we work with our portfolio companies, we often like to ask them to start with, where are you strong and where is the partner going to be really strong? And it takes a little bit of self-awareness and on the part of both parties to say, this is where they're going to come in to help us. And this is where it's not our core expertise. And I think if you start there, then you can go in with a mutually beneficial relationship.
Yeah, actually, I just want to add a point there actually on, being very, very open-minded about the types of partnerships, right? Everything is very interdisciplinary now. And I mentioned that we have we're a device company, we're a digital health company, but actually some of our, we have a breakthrough designation and a clearance in pulmonary hypertension. Interestingly, it wasn't internal where we were inspired to pursue that indication. We were actually partnered with, J&J, Actelion actually, who sell a lot of pulmonary hypertension drugs. And it was actually the CTO of the pulmonary hypertension division there at Janssen and J&J who actually gave us the inspiration to say, have you thought about this rare disease called pulmonary hypertension, which this year is actually going to be big because Merck is pushing it, right, with Winrevair, sotatercept. So, it wasn't an obvious partner for us. And actually, they inspired us to actually develop that indication. They actually sponsored our clinical trial. And then actually, their CTO actually ended up joining us as our CSO, actually. So, very, very unconventional. And it was actually them who prompted it.
Adrian, you brought up a couple of times now your pharma partnerships. Is there anything that we in the medtech community can learn from pharma's approach to AI native companies and vice versa? Anything they should be learning from us?
That's a great question. I don't have an immediate answer for that. But what I would say is that, you ultimately, we are in diagnostics. And ultimately, a diagnostic is really really only very useful if you can link to a therapeutic, right, for that outcome. And so by default, there is a natural synergy. That's number one. Number two is that I feel like diagnostics has always been a little bit more, sort of mechanical and structural in terms of its diagnostic kind of scope, right? Mm. But then now with the power of these technologies and the sensors, you're going into more kind of subgrouping of diseases and a little bit of a molecular side of things, right, with imaging. And I think that's where that interaction with pharmaceuticals and pharmacological research is actually very, very interesting. So we, in talking to our pharma partners, they're really interested in looking at subgroup analysis in pulmonary hypertension. For those of you who may or may not know about pH, there's lots of different groups. There's pulmonary arterial hypertension, which is really vessel disease. And then group 2 is really secondary to heart failure. So all of these have very different etiologies and have different treatments, actually. And so how you interact with those different treatment types and then how you can classify and categorize your patient pool is probably where some of that interaction might come.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking that question. I'll turn it back to Jyoti for a question about that I often like to ask is, what does AI mean for the medical device industry and how we operate, not just the impact that our products have clinically, but for how our industry is fundamentally run? Do we have any thoughts about how that may pan out?
Yeah, I think honestly, we've just scratched the surface here for the industry at large, for our providers as well, right? I think the roles and responsibilities are shifting very, very rapidly. Like, what skill do you need to get something done? Right? That is like, it's a complete rethinking of that. What type of a device rep do you need sitting in the room performing a procedure, helping you with the procedure, right? And I'm truly excited by what you can do in the interventional space. I feel like there has been a lot of activity on the screening space. The diagnostics are getting so much better. I think we've just scratched the surface interventionally in terms of robotics. What can that do to be completely autonomous? And for us as medtech manufacturers, I think going to market is going to be a very, very big deal as well. Mm-hmm. How are we going to take these products out to market, right? What types of partnerships we are going to do? So there is going to be a complete redefinition of how our customers evaluate us as well. I hope there will be a day when we don't go sell a cardiac scanner for ultrasound. Rather, we actually sell a platform that essentially can tell you how can you make sure that your heart failure patients are triaged on time, diagnosed on time, and actually can get through the pathway in the most efficient manner. Now, that is a very different shift in thinking. And it's not natural to many of us who are like, yeah, I can do the best CT, I can do the best MR, but it almost doesn't matter, right? So I think that redefinition is truly in progress. A lot of the health systems we talk to now, actually a recent one came to us to say exactly that. Heart failure. Tell us what your pathway is for heart failure. How can we work together to co-create that, right? So that's a different way of thinking altogether.
Yeah, it's that different way of thinking that I think has made AI native device companies so attractive to investors. And Daniel, I'm curious from your perspective at Vista.ai. I know that our friends at Khosla are extremely excited about the company, and we've talked several times as well. When we look at medical device companies often in the past, it's been kind of nerve-wracking, right? Because they have large mechanical devices that require several different iterations. And often when you do those iterations, whole new application to the FDA. Often commercial traction is required, and that requires a heavy load from a salesperson and a clinical person at every case. And that can be quite burdensome to invest in, and the load to get to an exit can be challenging and daunting for investors. Do you see your business in the same light in terms of its impact for investability for the device industry and how you look at how it is you operate fundamentally?
So it is quite different. When we were doing Shockwave, we had to go through the back committee like everybody else, right? So you have to go through that process and how do you break through with no reimbursement? We were charging $3,300 for a device where the reimbursement setting was about $150. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty tough. Mm-hmm. Bad numbers. So how do we do that? Well, we piggybacked on TAVRs, right? So without going too much into it, we became a facilitator for a procedure they desperately wanted to do that by itself wasn't profitable, but it became a facilitator and got us on the shelf. Then we elbowed our way into a larger presence. You can't do that with AI. Doesn't work. Math's wrong. The go-to-market strategy, as noted, completely different. Refreshing in some ways, depressing in other ways, right? Because it's tough. You go from this is really interesting to prove it to me, to AI governance committees, to 4-month selling cycles turn into 8-month selling cycles. So while your go-to-market isn't body heavy, it's time heavy, right? So you're spending a lot of money, but in different ways. All of that said, once you're in, your gross margins are in the 90s, right? So your payback is extraordinary.
That's right.
And if you can manage to be SaaS oriented, that payback starts to become economically extraordinarily compelling.
That SaaS model for AI native companies and medical devices, I think, is revolutionary for how it is. It's investable, its impact on customers, how economical it can be, and so forth.
Absolutely. And it becomes a category that reminds me of the very, very early, I'm going to call them cowboy days in interventional cardiology, where the devices were just popping out all over the place and it's $600 balloons and everybody was paying cash for them. And it was just phenomenal. It reminds me of that environment a bit from the standpoint of the creativity, commercial creativity and excitement around opportunity and go-to-market strategy variability that you can bring to bear.
You're dating us with talk of the early days of interventional cardiology. Anyway, so I see we're out of time. So real quick, lightning round. What do we think is next for AI and cardiovascular medicine?
Wow, that's an interesting one. What drew me to Vista is what I'm going to call that what's next. And that is an ability for AI to help in creating the images that drive therapy. The best of human eyes can recognize things that are still not quite as good as what AI can do. The reason why I decided to do one more and jump from intervention to upstream in imaging is to make sure that the right patient gets to the right procedure. There's an opportunity to do that in cardiovascular because it's an image-heavy business. And computers can look at images better than humans.
I think it's about, I think cardiovascular disease is very, has a lot of overlapping symptoms and a lot of confounding factors. And so AI is going to help us be able to find those connections, those relationships that were not obvious before.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And I honestly think just managing the silos of care, even within the cardiovascular spectrum, AI is going to change that completely. Today, there is so much fallout between every single element of how care is delivered, right? Episodic care. So I think it's going to completely change that by taking the complexity away, just sort of really making that easier for us to give patients the best outcome, no matter where they are in their journey.
That's right. For us, I think it's AI's integration with robotics. I mean, Intuitive Surgical really coined the term robotic surgery for everybody in this room. I think for us, the next generation of that is combination AI with robotics so that you can focus away from the grunt work of a procedure and just focus on the patient. I'm looking forward to things like robotic colonoscopies, if anyone's out there with one, and so forth. For some of the other procedures, starting there, I think, where it's not the emergency procedures, we can gain credibility and traction there and then move on more broadly from there. Well, anyway, we've run over time. I thank you all for your patience and time, and it's been a great panel.